This is the Sourced Podcast, where cold mornings, screaming bull elk, and bent rods turn into legends told. Hosted by Nate Zelinsky and brought to you by Jiffy Ice Fishing, we go beyond tags and trophies, into the grind, the heartbreak, and the moments that keep us coming back for more. If it bugles, if it bites, if it lives wild, it's Sourced. Lock in.
Welcome to the Source Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. Guys, I tell you what, we are super excited to be here today. But first, as always, I have to give a huge shout out to Jiffy Ice Fishing for providing everything that we have to do this podcast. So we're excited about it. But today, a concept that everybody wants to talk about, and more so, when we talk about the Source Podcast, we are going straight to the source for the best information on this topic. Mr. Joe Okada, how you doing today, Joe?
How's it going, man? Nice to see you.
You as well, man. I tell you what, I'm excited to be here with you. It's so funny, right? We have fished tournaments together, which I feel like wasn't that long ago, but in reality, it's like 20 years ago, probably.
We're old.
So we're getting old, but we used to fish together way back in the day. But today we want to talk about the concepts of forward-facing sonar, and we can talk about everything. We're going to talk about what's the value of it, and then I really want to dig in, almost most importantly, on how to rig it. Right, your boat, you seem to do better with it than about anybody, especially on the multi-species side. Right, you do it a lot for walleye, but that will fall into a lot of categories of pike, muskie, and everything else. So we're going to dive into a lot of the concepts with forward-facing sonar, but, to just kind of lead in, right? I know you personally, and it's so funny because as I do this podcast, we bring on all my buddies, and it's so funny because I know you more as a buddy, as, a dad and all this kind of stuff. And before I do this, I always jump on ChatGPT and I'm like, hey, write me a script for this guest. And I'm like reading through it, I'm like, man, they've done a lot of cool stuff, because, right, when you're in the industry together, you don't necessarily follow each other's careers. We call and talk more about the friend side of things more than we talk about everything else. So, long list of accomplishments, Joe. You've done a little bit of everything, but as you look through here, it's crazy how I would say you are more on the cutting edge side of a lot of things, right? So when it comes down to concepts, you're on the forefront of techniques, on forward-facing sonar, on gear. One of the first guys to run a bass boat in a walleye tournament, right? So you've done a lot of things through your career that I would say you're ahead of the general game. What brings you to do that, or what starts those kind of conversations?
Mostly it was just to try to stay ahead, to maintain a competitive advantage, so that because if you slouch in trying to push it, someone else will just overtake it, and then they'll reap the rewards for that. And plus, it's just fun for me to kind of geek out on if I see emerging, and if I see how we could leverage certain things, then I try to go all in. And the forward facing sonar stuff has been just a complete whirlwind since I started using it in 2021. And I actually, before you and I were chatting just before this started, I was trying to think back to where it all started.
Yep.
And I had a moment when I first used it, and I'm sure you'll be able to relate. I was on Mille Lacs in 2021, and I put it in the water for the first time, preparing for a head-to-head tournament that year. And Mille Lacs, it's just full of walleyes. So all of a sudden I start seeing all these blobs floating out in front of me over a 20-foot mud flat. And I'm throwing things at them, just whatever I had in the boat, and I'm seeing responses. And that scene in The Matrix when Neo's like in the hallway and he's stopping bullets,
yeah,
and the green lights are coming down. Like, oh my God, this is, you think you see everything all of a sudden, and all the light bulbs are going off, and it's so amazing. And then I remember leaving Mille Lacs and coming to my home body of water and realizing that this lake is a lot, full of a lot more drum and carp and gog, pike, and it all of a sudden it was like this deflating thing where it wasn't as easy as Mille Lacs made it appear to be. But I left Mille Lacs with the knowledge, knowing if I can really harness this technology and really adapt it to how I like to fish, it will change everything about the way I fish, and it certainly has. Right.
That's exactly it, and it's funny because it was that head-to-head tournament, right? So head-to-head, social media-driven event to where everybody's watching you live, and that's the first time where I think we're watching you do that, where you're just like, holy cow, and even it was cool because you're following multi-pro anglers, right? Extreme anglers, the best, and you were gravitating to the forward-facing more than anyone, and that's where all of a sudden, just on that particular event, you watched it, and you watched the wheels turn, and it's changed the entire game. And, I would say more so for me than a moment where it changed things for me is as a guide, right? So, there was years when my peak of my career, I was guiding 300 days a year. So I have so much time on the water. And as a guide, it's the same body of water. So I'm not challenged in a tournament situation to learn new things. I go out and I do my deal and I catch fish. And when I started using forward-facing sonar, I was so confident in my fishery, in my fish, and the behavior of those fish. And then you drop it down and you watch these fish and just their habits, their movement, what they're doing. And you literally watch 25 years of knowledge. I don't want to say go out the window, but it changed. The perfect example, right? When in my boat, I drive over a hump and I see 6 walleyes sitting there. I lower my bow mount electric motor. I turn around, I throw my jig, and I'm like, they're still sitting there. And all of a sudden you drop forward-facing sonar. It's like, why do they move so much? I'm like, sit still for a second. But everything went out the window. The amount of fish that when your bait hits the surface, they swim up, right? This walleye that we have known to live on the bottom on a piece of structure swims up 18 foot, looks at your jig, follows it back down, you hop it twice and you catch it. But it's changed everything. And I think we talk about this, whether you are going to utilize forward-facing sonar, or you're just going to learn from the education behind it. I had a talk about it on the radio show I was doing the other day. I was like, hey, even if you don't get the stuff, follow the anglers that are using it, because what they teach you about fish behavior will take you 10 light years ahead of where you're currently at.
It will. You said something really important. Well, you're a monster because you're out 300 days a year. So you're accumulating all these experiences and all the pattern recognition that comes along with success and failure throughout those 300 days, and all of a sudden, you realize that those 300 days, all they were doing was preparing you a strategy of educated guesses. That's all we were. That was our threat. That was the wall we were hitting. Is you're just accumulating all that knowledge or what you perceived as knowledge. And you're taking those educated guesses from where do I put my trolling motor down to, visualizing that fish behind every retrieve, thinking of how you're going to trigger a response, whether or not there was a fish behind you or not. So basically, every step of the way throughout our entire fishing lives has been a series of educated guesses through pattern recognition that we experience through lots of days on the water. And then when you finally get those eyes underwater in real time, there's so many other light bulbs go off. And you realize much of what you thought really didn't exist, and it's been fun to relearn fishing all over again.
That's it. It's 100%. That's it. It's crazy, and it definitely keeps you on your toes, because you watch anglers that are just getting into the sport and they're starting with it and they're keeping up with you, or they're doing new patterns and new techniques, and you're just like, holy cow! And obviously the old stuff still worked, but it's changed everything. So that's it. All right, so to kind of start off, obviously we're talking forward-facing sonar, talking about you, to highlight who you are and more so the value I want to say into this. It's so funny. So we have a mutual friend, right? Bobby Blosser, Robert Blosser, holds more titles on paper, right? Like he's a legend. And Bobby and I are extremely close as friends, and I'm very old school. And it's because of my days of guiding, right? I've done so much guiding that it doesn't force you, it allows you to get these old school ruts, and I don't tournament fish as much as I used to, or hardly at all anymore. So I'm not on the cutting edge as much as you are. And I'll call Bobby all the time. And I'm like, hey man, I got this new thing, whether it's forward-facing sonar or settings on a graph or whatever. And I'm like, hey, what do I do? And he's like, hold on. And then he calls you, right? And then I call other anglers. And somehow at the end of the day, all the conversations go back to Okada. So no matter who I call in the industry to ask for help, because I'm not cutting edge, the conversations come back to you. So that's why we're here. This is literally the source of a lot of questions, especially anything techie. It just seems like when it comes to that, you're the first one to do stuff. And people will be like, I remember talking to Bobby, I had a night trip and I was night fishing in real rough water, and I was like, man, it was dicey out there. I almost fell out of the boat. He's like, why don't you run short rods? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, why do you run short rods? He's like, I don't know. Okada runs short rods. I just do it because he did it. So again, just the fun stories over the past 2 decades lead to you, and that's why I'm excited to have you on the podcast. I know that's kind of a part of the long intro here, but man, you're a part of a lot of things. I think the biggest thing, you throw a lot of rules out, and you're just like, this makes sense, so we should do that.
That's right. But don't tell his brother that I'm doing this podcast with you right now, because now his brother is my boss over at Bell Ford. But I'm talking to one of Ford's ambassadors. I got
this. Totally allowed. Totally allowed. Absolutely. We'll sign off on this. All right, Joe. So forward-facing sonar, we're going to talk about rigging it, utilizing it, but we know that your light bulbs went off. You talked about that. For somebody who is on the fence, I want you to start off there. What's the biggest thing that it's changed, or why should somebody start with forward-facing sonar? Again, I think we're going to get a lot more detail than that, but as people are listening to it, let's start there because I want your input on that.
Well, first, it gives you the idea that life exists where you're looking. And so by just scanning around and seeing life, you get to see from little bait fish balls to seeing how the whole ecosystem works in that moment in time, in that little sliver of a sonar cone that you get to look through. You're seeing everything happen in front of you. And then over time, you start to see how that whole ecosystem is interacting with each other, which eventually spells out different setups, that you can start to leverage, whether it's activity modes or the pace of the fish or where they are in relation to the bait or the structure, and different things start to pop. And then as soon as you start to see that stuff unfold, then you can start to say, well, where else in the lake might this be happening and where isn't it? And then all of a sudden different patterns emerge that you never thought to explore in the past. So just basically you're giving yourself just eyes under the water, so that you're able to finally absolutely 100% confirm that there's something happening in front of you, whether it might not be your target species,
Yep.
but life is happening in front of you,
I agree 100%. And that's it. I mean, honestly, every cast with the confidence, right? When you don't see them before, you're like, oh, they might be there, I just might not see them, and you wasted time. Now you're like, hey, if they're not here, we move on. And then once they are there, every cast is way more dedicated. You don't have a weak technique, because every time you see one, you're like, oh, let's focus, because we know that could be a bite. So I think even just your skill set is better because you're more prepared almost as an angler.
I agree, but you have to be patient with yourself too. It's basically, obviously there's a lot of ways to accelerate your learning curve now through all the information that's available online and things like that. But I still say give yourself 2 years of dedication towards it, because you're gonna start with a high like I experienced on Mille Lacs, and then you're gonna go into a little lull of self-doubt of what you're actually seeing or how you're interpreting what you're seeing, because it didn't play out exactly the way it was when all bulbs were magically going off at that one special moment in time. So being patient with the learning curve and embracing it, and that means throwing at the wrong fish a million times, and working on your muscle memory to figure out how to find your bait consistently and how to present it right, and different ways that different ways you approach fit. All the things start to come together, but you got to give yourself time. And I'd say if you dedicate yourself for 2 years using this, all of a sudden things just start to make more sense. Your confidence then comes out of that little valley and starts to go back up on the uphill climb again.
And I couldn't agree more. That's 100%. And more of the frustrations, like we're going to talk about that, whether it's on your bow mount, pole setups, we'll get into all that, because that is a big part of it. Like, I want to use it for every cast, but how do I make it more efficient with that? So,
and before we move on from that, remember, you might not always see them. When I was on Mille Lacs, of course, I saw every blob because they were up and floating, and there was a million walleyes to be casting at. But sometimes, like I'll go to a rock pile and it's crawling with, like you said, a herd of walleyes that you see. You come back an hour later and it's vacant, but you still it's the juiciest structure on the entire system, and you still make a cast because you're dead set on something happening, and all of a sudden a fish comes out of nowhere and exposes itself, and you're like, "What? I didn't see it." So does that mean that whenever I'm looking around and I don't see anything, am I truly not seeing anything?
That's true.
It tells you that good spots are always going to be good spots. Fish can hide in nooks and crannies. They can, they can still be evasive from their sonar beam. And if you have confidence in the spot and you allow fish to kind of show themselves eventually, then that can come too. And that's part of that learning curve where what you're seeing might not always, correlate to what you hope to be interpreting.
I talked to a bass angler about the same thing. He was fishing where they had like a foot of kind of a soft moss, and all the fish were ambush hunting below it. And he was like, on live, it was dead. He goes, and we had to pull him out of there. And he goes, you'd throw a bait over them, and it would look like a ghost town. And all of a sudden, 8 or 9 bass would come out of it. And they were almost angry about it because they're like, now that we have this technology, we don't like those spots. We want to be able to power fish. We want to burn through them. And they're like, we get frustrated when we have those areas because they're like, our new mentality, our new style is to power fish. And when you hit those spots where it's a rock pile where they're in the rocks, or a weed edge where they're in the weeds, you lose them. And very, it'll be a while, before we have technology that'll be able to pick out that type structure.
It will be, but eventually those sneakier fish that get overlooked are going to become the tournament winners. Right now, we're able to buy. Like I have a lake an hour away from me, loaded with walleyes, giants, but at night, especially when it gets cold, belly to the bottom. You can look down with your headlight and see 100 of them in front of you, but you're looking at your fish finder and it's a ghost town.
No
and it's
kidding.
And if you do see a little nugget on the bottom, you can't tell if it's a 30-incher or a 16-incher. So. But you're right. A tournament angler is now using that as a filtering mechanism, and they're still bypassing those fish, looking for easier targets to just maximize their efficiency on the water. But I think in time, the sneakier fish, the harder the ones that you have to be more patient with, are the ones that are going to come through for us in time.
I believe that 100%. Yeah, they're not getting picked on, and just those fish that are going to get overlooked in the system. All right, so now before we talk rigging, I want to talk about the 2 things that I would say educationally are the biggest thing that forward-facing sonar has done for me in my career. So first and foremost, activity. I would say the average fish, and I mean walleye, bass, lake trout, pike, whatever. I would say most of my fish are far more active than I think they are. In my head, they are covering water, moving around, elevation in the water. I mean, how often a fish comes way off bottom to look at something and goes back down blows my mind. I literally, in my entire career, and I work with biologists, I feel like I am at least on the upper level of actual fish behavior, and I never had a clue how much they move in a feeding situation, in a non-dormant state. And so that's first and foremost how much they move. So that blew my mind. And then number 2, how easy fish are to catch if you put a bait on their head. And this is something I don't like to talk about, right? Because I think it makes all of us look bad. And, working with great bait designers like yourself, right? So we all work industry. We all work with these great people. And when I take away forward-facing sonar, I am running the best things I possibly can, the best baits, the best photo finish, sharp. I mean, everything is flawless on my technique. And now forward-facing sonar, I have a jig head with a crawler, which used to be like a 6-month season for me to maybe catch some fish. Now from like March until December, I throw it on these 30-inch fish and I put it right here on their nose, and they suck it in. And they shouldn't, but they do. So like, I'm not saying I go out and catch big fish all the time, but it's unbelievable how when you cater to a fish, when you ask them to swim 5, 8, 10 feet, they don't do it. But I'll tell you what, you put it 2 inches from their mouth, it blows my mind, of all species, how much easier they are to catch once you can cater to them. So the 2 things that I have learned is 1, how active they are, and number 2, if I really have better boat control, better cast control, and I can put a bait on their head, it blows my mind. The reason this started, I was working with Berkeley on some fishing line, right, to be better at casting, accuracy, dropping through the water, all this kind of stuff. And like I said, I'm old school. I'm not you on the train of forward-facing sonar. So I got, tasked with this staff, and I'm like, I don't know if it matters that much. And then the more I get involved and the more I notice, I'm like, oh man, I put it on his head and he ate it every single time. Like, I'm like, oh, this matters. So now I'm in this transformation of fine tuning all my gear. But what's the biggest educational thing that you've learned from it?
You just hit one of the biggest nails on the head. Once you start to understand what you're looking at, and that doesn't take 2 years. That takes less time, but you just have to be really consistent about it, and to visit, different bodies of water. Start with your home body of water because you're comfortable with it and you understand your fish densities and stuff like that. But then start to travel around and look at new bodies of water with some fresh eyes and digest all that. But the biggest key of anything, like you said, is delivery. If you start to really work on your delivery on fish, that will be one of the biggest catalysts to better success using that technology.
It's crazy. I mean, where I used to be so specific on color and all this stuff, and now I'm like, again, it's just crazy. And obviously, you're not going to see every fish like you said, so you still have to have good presentation. I'm not telling you to go be lazy, but just at the end of the day, when you make a fish swim to a bait, things have to be pretty dang dialed in. If you can put it on their face, you can get a little sloppy, and it still works. And it's just crazy to me.
Yeah, but I get, from bait design perspective, baits that are capable of calling fish away from their, that easy zone. If you're able to call a hungry fish away and make them become interested in it, that does say a lot about the bait itself.
Yeah.
But now that you can see everything happen, you put that thing on the money, and the color is much less relevant at that point.
I mean, that's it. And more importantly, when you combine the two, it's lethal. I mean, I would literally say in the very short time that I've been on the bandwagon, I will say that I was last. My average client was on the forward-facing train far faster than me. Like, they get on their boat and they're like, hey, man, what are we doing here? And I'm like, this is good. We're fine. And they're like, we can't see anything. Like, they were angry at me because I was so slow on the train. But once I really dialed it in, my big fish window for me, which, I mean, really it's all year now, but my specific window of that, like July, August, September, which used to be my least productive time as a guide, is now my big fish season because I know where they're at. So it literally took a slow time into the peak time, and I would say that it's upped my big fish game like 100%. I mean, the numbers I put up in a week is what I used to do in a year on 30-inch fish, all by being able to spot shoot. And you really have to work individual fish differently. But I'll tell you what, once you hone it in, it's insane. So yeah, it's been just life-changing.
That's incredible. Now, when you're guiding, your boat setup is different than other people, than a tournament fisherman typically is. But I think the average fisherman that wants to get to dig deeper into this and start leveraging it more might see the way you set it up to be advantageous to them. Just, the way they like to set up a boat. Maybe they don't all want to be on the hunt, maybe. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but you have deucers kind of stuck all over your boat now so that no matter where someone is in the boat, they have access to a view, basically. Right?
So I've changed my boat every year now, Joe, for 3 years in a row. So I have not ran the same forward-facing setup yet. Every year I change it up, right? I used to have one on my bow mount and one on a pole, so I could have one that I'm moving around with. But once I find fish as a guide, I anchor, I spot lock, and then that deucer comes totally irrelevant. So I really have gotten away from putting anything on my bow mount. It's great when I'm moving around. It's great because I have a power head, but it's just not of use when I anchor, and I do so much of that. So I've stopped doing that. And then I've had multiple poles. I've had them hard mounted just back to the side. Right now, I'm running kind of the craziest setup I ever have. I'm running one pole with 3 deucers. So I'm running one pole, and I have them spaced out just enough where I don't get interference. So when I drop a pole off the side or the back, I am literally, especially in forward facing, I am getting a huge swath. So I have my graphs mounted on the tower, so I have 3 12-inch screens stacked. Top screen is looking to the left deucer, middle screen is straight, right deucer to the side. So I can have clients in the back of the boat. I have the deucer pointed in one direction. I can have 3 to 5 anglers casting in the water, and they can all watch their jigs. So it's really helped me to not have to adjust my handle. I set it in the water, you're fishing. Now, with that said, it's a bigger contraption. I'm generally speaking picking, 100 degrees or something like that I'm focusing on. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but everything I've used so far, I love it, simply for the fact that I'm never out of screen, right? If they swim out of my center field, they come up on my left. So I can make 5-6 casts without touching my handle. That's where when I run a single handle, I'm more accurate. I think I'm a little more fine-tuned, but if I'm on a windy day and the boat's swaying and the fish are moving, I'm like halfway through my cast, I'm like, oh, I can't see it. And it doesn't matter. But as a human, our head, we're like, we got to see the fish take the bait. So you're like stopping your cast. So that's where I wanted to pick your brain. As I want to know what you would suggest to somebody starting off, but then I also want to know what's on your boat. So, we don't need to talk brands, right? I mean, they all make one, right? Lowrance makes a great one. Garmin makes a great one. All the brands are having live, and I would say no matter what you choose, they're all better than not having one, right?
Now,
that's it. Half my guys run Garmin. I am hardcore. I love the Lowrance. The new Deucer by Lowrance is insane. So either way, they're all good. But are you running? Half my guides that work for me are running ice shuttles. They don't even have their graph hard mounted on their boat, so they're running 2 units or 3 units. They're having portable handles, but their graph, battery, everything is in a portable unit, just like it is for ice. And that way they can move all around their boat and they can shuffle around. And it seems pretty versatile because they can move around. They just have pole mounts everywhere and they bounce around. Other anglers are hard mounting them. The sky's the limit. What would you suggest for somebody? And then I want to know about your boat.
One of my best friends has been doing this now for a couple years. He's a hardcore muskie fisherman. So he grew up, the way a lot of muskie guys do around here is, their guest will be in the bow, so they get first hit on the muskies. And then the other guy likes to put the, trolling motor pedal on the back, and they stay on the back deck and they cast. So that's just his comfort zone. And what he's found himself doing is he's not even on the bow. He has one pole at his console. So whether he's just driving around and observing, or if he's actually set up and fishing where he's weed lines are huge here. So a lot of times you can't just be pointing your bow perfectly at a weed line. Or if you're cruising a weed line, and you have your transducer fixed to your trolling motor, you need a perpendicular look so that as you're cruising parallel to the weed line, you have a transducer that's perpendicular to the weed line to expose the weeds as you go. And that's been his setup. He just cruises a weed line with a pole pointed perpendicular at the weed line, and when he sees something, he spot locks, reconfigures his pole till he's looking at the group that he wants to fish and cast them. And he never really leaves his console or his back deck. That's just kind of where he lives, and he's totally fine with that. But he also acknowledges how, and we're talking lakes right now. If you're talking on the Mississippi River, boat configuration is totally different. So we can dive into current after that. Oh yeah. Talk lakes, and he acknowledges that if he were just fishing alone or fishing in a tournament, he wouldn't operate his boat that way. He'd have a trolling motor mounted transducer and possibly a pole just for a different look or a different angle if he wanted to. Or just scan and not have to be on the bow. I agree with him. I always have 1 or 2 transducers directly on the trolling motor, no turret, just so that my foot is an extension of my eyeballs. And once you develop that muscle memory, you're able to keep your bait, on the screen more consistently, and you're able to really line up your casts so that, like we were talking about before, that delivery couldn't be any more precise if the setup is right there. But then if I was to take my family or a guide trip, that's not optimal for anybody else in the boat other than me.
Very true.
And I part of me almost feel if I start putting more people in the boat in the future, I have to be able to accommodate them, because you can't leave them hanging if you're sitting there staring at them all the time. You know what I mean? I mean,
I take my twins out, and same thing. They loved fishing, and I say loved with the D there, right? And now that forward facing's there, like I'm in the back working a bait, and I'm like, oh, cast over there. They're like, I'm not casting over there. I mean, they call me out in a half a second, and they're 12. They're like, absolutely not. They're like, I am standing by the forward facing and I am casting where I can see the bait. Like, they won't do it. And I mean, like, I talked to Bobby about that. Like, it's changing tournaments. Like, if you don't have a graph for everybody involved, co-anglers, it's not there. That is part of your setup. You know what I mean?
That's right. And even if you have multiple setups, if the guy on the front of the boat is trying to maximize his time up there, you have to be careful about deviating from where he's hunting and what he's focusing on versus like, hey, I'm in the back of the boat and I just saw something else happen. Change course, scan it. There's a little discombobulation at first too if there's multiple deuces going, because you're only looking at a sliver.
Oh yeah.
So everybody in the boat is experiencing a little sliver of their lake at a little bit different time, and usually only one sliver is awesome at one time. Yeah. So the dude that's controlling the boat just feels like a squirrel chasing his tail half the day, and so part of the, as far as effectiveness goes during a tournament day, is you have to almost surrender to the guy that's controlling the boat so that he can just continue to plow and navigate and take in information and focus on just his sliver at a time. And it's not the best way to fish with a group, but in my opinion, it couldn't be, you couldn't have it more effective than doing it that way.
Okay.
So yeah, on my personal boat, I rely almost entirely on the trolling motor when as long as I'm not on a river.
Yep.
But when you're on a river and you spot lock that thing,
done.
So that's where a pole becomes unbelievably important, so that you can scan wing dams and look at little pockets. And I mean, I don't have I've developed a good river eye over the years, but being able to see how fish set up on structures under current, and then looking at the surface of the water and watching the current stream swoop by as you're getting an actual underwater look of how it all set up, everything clicks then. Everything makes sense. You know why you're throwing your jig on that little part of the swirl, so that by the time it gets to that part of the swirl, you're right in the juice, and everything. It's so awesome. It's so, and for anybody that's on the, like we were talking about, anybody that's on the fence looking to leverage this technology, don't be afraid that it's going to take any joy out of it, because all it does is it repositions your main focus and where you're committing your attention to for most of the day, and in a different way. Before, it was just visualizing your every retrieve and maybe looking at some side scan or down scan once in a while, but you're just shifting your attention to where it needs to go, but you're still enjoying every moment, and the anticipation is just a different kind of anticipation before you get the bite.
No, totally. I 100% agree. And I agree. We get that question a lot. Like, I'm not techie yet. It's going to change it. It definitely doesn't change it. It makes the experience better. Now, I will say, I don't want to say stress, but like, I wouldn't say I'm as relaxed on the boat, right? I'm definitely a little bit more on edge. I'm standing, but you also catch a lot more fish. So, I don't think there's anything negative to that, with that being said. Yeah. So,
more fish, except during that little dip in your learning process. Holy cow, this is amazing. Wait, I hope I'm thinking through this right. I hope I'm seeing what I hope I'm seeing, but I don't really think I see what I'm seeing. And now I'm doubting myself. So there is that dip where your catch rate gets crushed before to ascend again. So.
Perfect. Now, I want to continue on with some rigging stuff, but just while you said that, I think it's an important part to talk about education. So, during the dip, because I went through that same phase, right? So I started off, most of my forward-facing sonar startup was on big lake trout. So it was huge fish. So, like, totally naive, because I'm looking at 40-inch fish that weigh 30 pounds. Like, you don't miss them, right? You're like, look at that thing. And then I'm on hard structure, so it's like I have hard bottom and mega fish. There's no hiding them, so that it really boosted my confidence. Then I went fishing pike in weeds, and they're like non-moving, sitting in the vegetation, and I'm like, this thing is junk. Why do I not see these fish? So I had that same learning curve. But and this is what I tell people with side imaging, with 2D, 3D, whatever the case you're using, when you start to go through that dip, that educational learning curve, right? Try to eliminate some species and try to eliminate some structure. So I always tell people, go with what you know. I was training a guy this last fall with forward-facing sonar, and we went to a boat dock, right? So we had a rock dam, concrete ramp, physical like boat docks that you stand on, as far as that goes. So we just sat there, and I'm like, all right, do you see the rock? Do you see the concrete? Do you see the steel pillars where the dock is floating? We have smallmouth under the dock. Like, we went to a controlled environment, and we spent like 6 hours there, and he's like, I'm good. I'm like, do you really? Are you sure? And I made this guy just sit there and focus and make a cast and watch how every cast fell short, right? Because he would land his bait on the fish, but by the time the swing happened, he was way in front of the fish. And so I made him do this controlled environment, but all of a sudden after a day of that, he's like, I get it. You know what I mean? So I think people go into situations they already don't know, and they're like, I don't know if that's weeds, mud, sand, rock. I don't know what kind of species that is. And that's where that learning curve really hits a dip, to where I think if you can get comfortable with your equipment the most you can in a controlled environment where that the answers, it helps your brain kind of process that, to where when you get in those unfamiliar situations, you at least have a rough idea of what's happening with it.
That's right. Yep. I agree.
So perfect. All right, so rigging, we're talking bow mount. Again, I think the bow mount was one of my favorites for finding fish, chasing a cast. Once I spot lock, it was over. So we talk about pole systems. So walk me through your rigging, right? Obviously, transducers have to be at the right angles, the right levels, your boat, boat movement, all the stuff. Walk me through your specifics. If we have an angler that's watching this, they're like, all right, I'm convinced I'm getting one. Let's say they haven't made a purchase yet. What are you suggesting to them, right? Do you put one on the front? Do you put it on the back? What kind of poles you like? And that's fine. I work with the pole system. I work with Fishing Specialties. We all have a pole that we like. This is an open podcast, man. Let's talk about it. So walk me through what you would suggest a person brand new. What do you like? What does Joe Okada like as far as you're going to talk to the average guy, not a hardcore tournament angler, the average guy, right? He's going to fish pretty serious himself. He's definitely going to have some buddies on the boat. He might have some kids on the boat. What's that rig look like?
If you have, if you have a trolling motor that is like an Ultrex, with the cable, heel toe, instant response type trolling motor, and your objective with forward facing is so that you can see your bait on every cast, stick one on your trolling motor to start, especially if you're not going to be in a lot of current. But if you have, let's say you have a Tarova on your boat or something, and that is not an optimal trolling motor for bait tracking and sweeping, because you need your heel toe muscle memory and instant response to be able to leverage it to its max. So let's start with that trolling motor. If you have a Tarova or another power drive type thing with a trolling motor with a blade response, you go to a pole to start. And if you've got an Ultrex, and like I said, your objective is so that you can track your bait on every single cast, then put it on a trolling motor. So if you're starting with a pole, there's great concepts that you'll get out of it. You can you'll learn how a plumb pole is really critical to understanding. A plumb pole gives a clean signal and a consistent signal no matter where you're turned. If your pole is in the water like this and you're turning left to right, everything is just swinging this and you have no idea why. So when you start with your pole, make sure it's plumb in the water and make sure it doesn't have to be that deep unless you're bouncing around in really big waves. It actually helps to have it up about as high as it can go before it's not out of the water, unless, like I said, you just need to keep it buried in the waves.
Now, why is that? Why do you like it high?
Because you want as much of that beam skimming the surface as possible, so that when your bait enters the water, you'll see the splash, so you get an instant recognition of where you landed in relation to the mark that you're seeing on your screen, and then you can start your approach to that fish in the right manner. But if you cast, you don't see the bubbles hit the water or your splash from the bait. Now you've got about a 3 or 4 second delay before you finally might pick up on it, and by then you're not efficiently prepared to make the delivery on the fish. So having an instant readout as to where you landed in relation to the fish is really important. And the higher the transducer is in the water, the better. And also, when you get your transducer, you'll know it has a forward or a down mode. So if it's in forward mode, I would always, I would try to cheat it a little bit towards facing up, and you can do that within your setting. Adjust the angle offset and things like that. But and I used to do that manually. But just make sure you're trying to shine as much of the surface as you can without the surface, taking over,
blowing out
screen.
Now, I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to stop there for a second. That is why everybody that I call for advice says call Okada. So right now, on my boat, embarrassingly enough, I never have my deucers high up in there because I'm lazy and I want to scan under my boat. So my poles are crazy deep because I want to stand on one side of the boat, and when my clients are like, I'm not catching anything, I want to spin my pole and I want to look under my boat.
No,
but it helps me, but at the end of the day, it's the exact same thing. So I know the concept, but I don't do it. When your bait hits, people don't realize how much the bubbles make it. And that's the highlight of that little point that you just said there, is when the bait first hits, it makes a bigger disturbance and it blows out that graph for a second and you find it. So on your graph, you're going to see a huge mark, and that mark just gets smaller and smaller as that bait settles down and the bait starts to fall in the water column. Finding the bubbles is easy. Finding the individual bait is not as easy, and that's where that higher deucer is there. So I think there's there's room for both, right? If you don't want to be like, once I know my fish are on my one side, I'll take my pole with all 3 transducers, I'll move it left to right. So I bounce it each side of my boat fairly often. My graphs are centered in the back. But the concept there, I do like to scan around, but I definitely struggle finding the bait. And that's one of those things. So if you're an angler listening to this and you're like, oh, I do struggle finding my bait at initial cast, take Joe's advice. Have that deucer higher up in the water column, just subsurface. It'll help you see that splash, which instantly knows where your bait's at.
Yeah, and if you do have to bury your deucer down, you can go into your settings and you can add a negative pitch to your beam so that the beam starts to point up more towards the surface. So even if your deucer is lower, you're still exposing that beam to the surface enough where you can, see the splash. Yep. So you kind of get both worlds, but the beam in its factory settings, the way it shoots out, each one of those, each one of those signals that it pumps out, seems to be cleaner and stronger if you can keep it as close to factory as possible.
Yep.
With the exception of the natural offset that comes with the mounts. And I'm sure you're using 0 degree mounts on yours now, or using factory mounts on your transducer?
Right now I'm running factory mounts because with my pole I'm able to do that. But
yeah, no, you're right. That slight tilt, that slight offset on that transducer expose fish differently.
Yep.
And it tells out the fish a little bit better. But if you're one of my primary objectives with forward facing is to always to see every cast and to be in line with every cast, no matter where it is in the water column. And on that, using an aftermarket 0 degree transducer mount allows that alignment to happen, right? But you're right, especially when you get into that deeper water, it doesn't expose the fish quite the same.
It doesn't. That's where, so I'm set when running 3 deucers on one pole, I don't have the ability to fine tune all of them. I'm always going to have one just slightly off just for the way that I have mine mounted. So I'm sacrificing some clarity and overall some accuracy for the concept of always being in visibility. So I have another single pole that I run on the front, and I actually have a little micro ram mount on that one. So that one, again, I can fine tune absolutely flawless, and it's crazy because when I go up to my bow, I'm like, man, that image is clear, and I love it. Then I go back to the back, and I'm like, it's a little sloppy back here, but when I can see, half the dang lake, I'm like, it's pretty good. So that's where I wanted your take, because there's little bits of perks to every single way that you run it and do it. So what pole and what mounts are you running? So right, I'm running Fishing Specialties. That's my pole. I love it because of the way that I can move it left to right on my boat, right? So I have a Cisco rail basically on both sides of my boat. I have mounts for that Fishing Specialties pole on both sides, so I'm able to bounce it anywhere in my boat very quickly. That's why I run that system. It's super quick and easy. I love it. What pole and what mounts are you running?
For the pole, I've only run Brew City as a pole. This past year, I didn't even have a pole on my boat, which I regretted in a couple of river tournaments. But that was the only one I've ever used. It was light, functional. It worked good. But I wouldn't mind looking at to see what else is out there. There's who else was out there? Like that Sniper Marine when they first came. I saw that they had that. You remember that old trolling motor?
The 3 times the 3X.
So now that they've integrated a multiplier into their handle, so you basically spin the handle like this, and you can rotate 360 degrees, and I think that's a pretty cool function, especially if it holds up. But you honestly, if you're using it a lot, you just need a pole that's not too clumsy, light, and because you don't want it to hinder or get in your way as little as possible. And so if that pole that what was it? Did you say it's
I'm running Fishing Specialties, and it's super smooth. And my biggest thing is it's easy in and out, and it's easy to jump side of the boat. That's what I love.
Pretty smooth panning too.
Super smooth. Yep.
That's cool. Look at them. So yeah, that I would say for most anglers, starting with one pole just to learn what they need to learn about how a transducer sits in the water and what they're going to end up seeing as a result of how it's sitting in the water is a great first step to learning all about the forward facing. And it doesn't take that long once you start playing around with it. And then maybe you would, eventually move up to setting up your trolling motor for once you see the true power and how you could leverage it, but you're only a half step away because you're lacking the certain trolling motor that you need to accomplish it, or the mounts. And then as far as mounts go on the trolling motor, I use a couple different ones. Like right now I've got 2 on there, one so that I can turn it into scout if I want, or have two on forward, but just allow me to have different looks, whether it's way out or in tight. And one that I played with last year was Cornfield Crappie's 0 degree transducer mount. And what I liked about that is the arm was actually dead in line. The way the arm comes off the trolling motor shaft, the heel of the transducer is directly in line with the trolling motor shaft itself. So now there's not even this much of an offset off to the side. Okay. So if you imagine, and the heel of the transducer stays pretty tucked to the shaft. So if you imagine, if this is the shaft right here, and your transducer is way out here, as you swivel, you're making that transducer out in front of it swath way wider.
So much.
Nice. So that if you can tuck that heel as close to the shaft as you can without creating a bunch of interference, now when you make your micro adjustments to stay on your bait, everything stays tight, and it's a lot more forgiving to keep your bait in that.
I don't think people even realize how much, because most of the arms are going to be out there anywhere from 6 to 10 inches, especially, any of the self-deploy and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think people have any concept how much that magnifies. It's almost like a trolling rod on the bow of your boat versus the transom of your boat. People don't imagine the micro turn. Like, I always get hung up pulling boards. They don't think about those micro things. And that's one of those things that I very rarely hear people talking about with forward-facing sonar, especially on the bow mount. So that's good to know. Keeping that transducer tight definitely eliminates the magnification of the spin and the accuracy.
It does, because then when you're on your bait and you see it, and your heel and your foot is just making these slight, you're just basically tensing up your muscles in your heel toes to just barely move that trolling motor back and forth like this to stay on. That makes a world of difference, especially when you get into bigger waves.
Oh yeah,
being able to stay locked onto your bait is so key, and every little adjustment that you can make to optimize that will help you when the conditions get tough and makes it harder on other people.
That's it. All right, I got 2 remaining questions for you, and you can think about both of them and tell me which one you want to answer first. First, scout mode, perspective mode, right? It's a shallow water ability, but it's trying to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish with 3 deucers all in a forward facing. So the ability to see more coverage with less movement of a pole or an electric motor, it's huge. So I want your perspective. When does that scout perspective, that wider angle, when is that efficient for you? And then number 2, if I put you on a budget with forward facing sonar, right? Do you spend a lot of money on one wicked graph? Do you have a 12, 16 inch, the best deucer, the best mount, everything? Or do you go with like 2 7-inch screens, lower model, and you have one on each side of your boat, one on the bow, one on a handle?
Man.
So those are the 2 remaining questions. Let's hear your take.
Okay. If I was just starting out, you're going to realize really quick that a little bit more screen will help, stuff that doesn't take up many pixels, give you a little bit more light on your screens. When we used to think we had 2 5-inch units on our dash, and we were pretty cool because we had 2.
Oh yeah.
7 and 9s came, and our 5s looked small, and then 10s came, and the 7s looked. So I use a 16-inch now for mine, but a 12 is a beautiful picture.
Yep.
So I would say that, and even a 10 would work too. But a 12-inch screen that you can invest in, and there's different tiers, from the down, but just 12, and they all have great resolution now. So I'd say look into a 12-inch if you're just gonna have one transducer, but eventually you're gonna want another one, and I would say don't skimp on the screen size to start. It does help, especially when the sun's out or there's a lot of clutter in the water and you're really trying to parse through a lot of information quickly.
It's the truth. It's so funny because I used to love talking boats with people. I used to love the boat shows, right? It's an exciting time of life. People are investing in stuff. And honestly, now I hate it, right? People are like, hey, I want to buy a boat. And I'm like, oh. So then I'm like, what's your budget? And they're like, all right, I got 70 grand to spend, which is so much money. Like, it's so much money. So then they're like, all right, what should I get? And I send them pictures of $30,000 boats. And they're like, dude, I said I had 70. I'm like, I know, but we got to have a bow mount. We got to have a kicker, right? Even though we don't use it as much now with forward facing, like we got to have this. I'm like, and then we got to have 3 graphs and like, it used to be like the motor was a bit expensive on your boat. Now I'm like, hey man, instead of buying a new boat, we're going to buy a 15-year-old boat that we're going to equip with forward-facing sonar. And it's crazy. And people look at me like I'm nuts, but I'm like, dude, at the end of the day, if your true objective is to learn more and catch more fish and catch bigger fish at the end of the day, this is the technology that's doing it. But that's why I love asking that question, because at the end of the day, you're going to end up with multiple 12 to 16 inch screens once you take it to that level. It just is what it is. And I hate to say it, but I would rather run a lesser boat with better technology. And that was never me. That was never me. But now I would tell people, I'm like, hey, if I had one amount to spend, I would get a safe boat that I can still, run in and do my deal. But I would definitely get a less expensive boat and more expensive technology, because at the end of the day, that's helping us catch more fish.
I agree. I agree with what you just said. But the weird part, I'm spending more money on this next boat than I ever. And I can't wait, because I'm adding some cool. Maybe we'll come back and do another one of these later this year. I'll show you what I got.
Whenever you get your new boat, I want to do a podcast from the new boat. So let's just do it. That would be awesome.
Okay, cool.
I love that.
Question, I already forgot what the first one was.
What was that? Oh, this next question: perspective mode, scout mode, wide view. When do I use it? What's the effective depth? What's the situation where that's going to be good?
Make sure when you use it, make sure that you're always able to really fine tune the angle that it's deployed at, and that just depends on the depth of the water that you're in. And if you're going beyond 12-ish feet, you really, you're limited out to how far you're going to see and what you can really extract out of it. But I don't use it that much.
Okay.
But one of the best benefits is if you're on expansive sand flats, like for post-spawn fishing, you're just looking for wolf packs that you might not see out of your little sliver.
Yep.
That's really great. Or if you're just trying to, maintain a position along a certain structural element or a weed line or something like that, just so you can keep tabs on where your boat is in relation to where the transition is from soft to hard or weed to rock or whatever. That's really important too. But there's some anglers that are really taking it to another level and able to really dial it in. And, their setup is so dialed, they're still able to see the splash from when they land and watch fish interact with it. But I don't think, but even if you ask those anglers that are really dialed into that, and if you said, now you got to choose between that and your standard forward mode, they'd still say, all right, I'll take forward mode.
Yeah. No.
Your understanding of where fish are set up in the water column and how everything fluctuates, and there's just so much more information to gather there.
You definitely learn more from forward facing. The only thing that I'll say, that wider view when we turn our transducers over is the ability to see some fish. So if you just need that confidence, like, hey, I wanna see some stuff, I want to get some general education, it's huge for that factor.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a shallow water thing. So you heard it from the man right there. He's saying 12 foot or less and shorter distance. That's going to be the key concepts there.
I promise you, there's guys, saying, I'm in 20 and 60 feet. I already know. But honestly, I haven't tried to, lean on it like I do with forward. And maybe that'll be to my detriment at someday, but I just see so much more, what I want to use forward facing for is so much better done with forward mode. But how about you when you're out in deep water, just looking, scanning bait balls, stuff like that?
I have such a shallow bite for so many technique. I do use that view quite a bit. All my big rainbows are all sub 10 feet of water. Most of my pike are sub 10 feet. When I'm targeting most of my lake trout, I'm throwing top water for them, and I'm in shallow water. So I have enough bite to where I definitely utilize it more. And for me, it's not so much about accuracy at that point, because these shallow water fish are so aggressive. It's just getting the bait close to them. It's not fine tuning like we were talking about earlier in the podcast. So I do use it quite a bit, and again, I would say that effectiveness, that 10, 12 feet. On hard bottom, I can get away a little bit more just because, again, it kind of pops a little more. So, but I do use it quite a bit just for, like, I'm running a shoreline. It's like, here they come. Bomb that bait in front of them, get it out there, and it does help us catch a lot of fish in a lot of situations. But it's I would say more so than me preaching it to somebody to use it more, it's situationally good for me because my fish are shallow. You know what I mean? I have these big giant rainbows in like 2 to 6 feet of water, right? So it's ideal for that scenario. My big leggers are in 4 or 5 foot. So I just have a situationally a different opportunity in some of these western states that present an opportunity for that view to be a little bit more efficient. But true, nuts and bolts of it, I would say if I had to pick two, absolutely I'm forward facing because I can't see the depth. I can't see things like that. So that's the grit of it for sure.
Is why you use that? Is that what your ram mount on the front is for? So you can really fine tune your perspective.
I can fine tune it exactly, and that way, even if my angle, I can look at it, and that's where again I think so many people are so focused on the rules. They read the manuals and they're like, "Hey, this is what we have to do." When in reality, I drop it down and I start looking at what I don't like. I adjust it right, and what my view might be right for. People are like, "Oh, it's so blown out up there." I'm like, "Yeah, but this first 60 foot is what I care about, and it's perfect. I don't care that it's a clutter mess after that and things like that." So I think so many people get in their head what something has to be, and I will fluctuate from it a little bit just to make it better for me,
Sure, that makes sense.
Excellent. Well, awesome, Joe. I'll tell you what, we're about out of time, but you talked about your new boat. It's an opportunity. We're going to make sure that you come back on. Once you get that new boat, whether I come out there in person and see it or we do a video from your shop, I want to walk through the new boat, the latest technology. I'm sure you got all kinds of secret stuff on there we're probably not supposed to see, but I want to see it all. I want to hear about it. Last comment, what's the year of fishing look like for you? What are you doing this year? What are you excited about?
I'm pretty much just going to do. I'm going to stick to fishing with my buddy Galen on the River Series division. Perfect. For Game Walleye Series, just because I love. He's a legend on the river.
Yep.
I learn more and have fun with him every time we go out. And then I'm probably going to do the head-to-head series that they're bringing back for the...
That's what I want to know, because everybody out there, if you follow the new head-to-head series, they're bringing it back just like it was, some advancements. Joe, you're going to be a part of that, and people can literally get into your head right there. I mean, you are great on that head-to-head because you walk people through what's going on. Some of the anglers on head-to-head tend to be a little bit more quiet. You on the head-to-head series, so again, it's a social media-driven tournament. You talk people through what's going on through that process. It's a great way to follow you and learn a lot about the stuff we're talking about right now.
I'll try my best, and I even got my got a Starlink set up, so maybe I'll be able to just put my days out live to you guys.
I love it.
We'll talk through the whole day as we go, so maybe we'll make that happen.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Joe. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Nate. Have a good one.
All right, guys. Again, my name is Nate Zelinsky. This was the Source Podcast. Had amazing guest Joe Okada on today. And again, the entire Source Podcast is brought to you by Jiffy Ice Fishing. Stay tuned for your next episode. Hopefully you had a good time. Hopefully this helps you catch more and bigger fish every time you're on the water.